Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Design News webinar, Applying Agile Principles to Medical Device Product Development. This webinar is sponsored by Eccentric Mold and Engineering, and it's broadcast by Informa. My name is Peter Krass. I'll be your moderator today, and before we begin, I have a few very quick announcements. First of all, this webinar is designed to be interactive. There's a dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media, and participate in the Q&A session that we'll have toward the end of the presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout this event. You can also download a copy of the slides, and you do that via the resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, I will ask you to complete our survey that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. I hope you'll take a minute to fill out the survey before you leave us today. Your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve events in the future. Finally, if you experience any technical issues during this webinar, please click the Help widget that's found at the bottom of your screen. Or you can type your issue right into the Q&A area. And either way, we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Let's move on to our presentation, Applying Agile Principles to Medical Device Product Development. Discussing today's topic, we have Taylor Foster. He's an account executive with Eccentric Mold and Engineering. And if you'd like to learn more about Taylor, please check out the bios, like biographies widget. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Taylor Foster. Taylor.
Hey everybody, I really appreciate you joining us today for this chat. And as Peter let us know to kick us off here, the topic today is simply applying Agile principles to the medical device product development process. And what that does for you, as we'll walk through here today, is enable rapid iterations that give you more opportunity for innovation and go to market quickly within the medical device development field. A little bit about me, just to paint you a small picture of who you're talking to today, or rather who's talking to you until the Q&A session. My background is in mechanical engineering and business. I've been in the manufacturing world now for going on 3 years, and I've been very keenly focused on 3D printing, CNC machining, and injection molding in my time in the field. Since joining the manufacturing industry, I see probably 20 to 40 unique projects a day across many industries, but primarily medical device. And I consult on those and guide clients in the correct direction. So it's a little bit of my background and kind of my expertise or my chops for you to start. Today's discussion topics, what we're going to cover today, and you can expect to learn from spending some time with me here, and thanks again for doing so. We're going to start with leveraging simulation and rapid prototyping in your product development process. We're going to work to understand how using 3D printing and rapid injection molding prototyping together help you enable product prove-out. We're going to examine the traditional waterfall product development timeline and compare it to the Agile hardware development timeline. We're going to talk about some strategies to incorporate these new Agile tactics in your product development process right now. And I'm going to give you some examples of some real medical device OEMs that have successfully leveraged Agile principles, moving away from the waterfall method to deliver life-changing products to market in a more efficient manner. But before we do that, I'm a very interactive speaker. You guys will all learn, and gals. I want to start with a quick polling question, which you should see on your screen here in a moment. If I could just get your opinion here, I have a question. It is, has your company attempted to implement Agile for hardware development? And if so, to what extent was it successful? So we have 5 options here. Yes, it was very successful. Yes, it was moderately successful. Yes, but only for a project or 2. Yes, and it didn't work out for us. Or no, we've never attempted it before. So if you can just give me, and I'll give you guys a good 30, 45 seconds here to think about this and select an answer. But when you're comfortable, just click one of the options in your screen. Awesome. Looks like we have about 50% of folks who have answered so far. Just keep those coming in. I'll give you another 15, 20 seconds here to get answers in. No rush. Okay, we're up around 70% of folks have responded. Just give it another 10 seconds or so here. Get your last responses in if you wouldn't mind. Okay, let's see the last couple trickling in here. I'm going to close it out in 5 seconds. All right, awesome. Thank you for your input. Let's take a look at the results here. Okay, so overwhelmingly the answer amongst our group of attendees today is that you have not attempted to implement Agile. We do have some folks who have implemented it just for a project or two, about 20% of you. About 15% or so have done so with moderate success, and about 5% of you here today have done it, and it was very successful. So what I really, my biggest takeaway here that I want to point out is we don't have anyone in our audience today, of all our attendees, who said yes and it was deemed a failure. Okay, I think that's a huge takeaway here. Some folks have tried it, maybe 25% or so, 30% of you have tried it. The other majority of you have not tried it yet. So this is a really good topic to kind of walk through, both to reinforce the successes that have been experienced and help explain why, but also to dig into why it might be beneficial to try out for everybody else as well. Again, thanks for your input. So talking about the existing product development ecosystem, right? I think we all know it well. I don't know if we love it or hate it for most of us here, but it's what you know and love. 65% of you have done this and only this, it sounds like, in terms of product development. So the way this usually flows, as again, I'm sure most of us know, you start with ideation. You create a design file for it, do some virtual prototyping in CAD, make sure that that checks out. Then in step 4, you're probably going to move to some physical prototyping in the way of 3D printing, typically speaking, bringing it to real life for the first time, bringing it from 2D to 3D. And then you're going to move into pre-production. That is, cutting a steel tool, production tooling for those parts. Then you're going to validate and verify that that production tooling is working and creating the parts you need. And if that passes and it all works out all the way from step 1 to step 6 here, you're going to move into production. You're going to go to market with your parts and mass produce those, right? So that's typically the process. And you can see on the right the traditional graphic to represent this. And I want to call out immediately how cluttered this is, how complicated this is. And not only that, but I want you to notice how late in this process you get all the way to step 6, that validation and verification steps in this process, before you ever potentially find an error with what you've been making. So you've already, dedicated all this time across many teams, as you can see on your virtual and physical prototypes, but you've never molded it before moving to production, and you run into unexpected errors, right? Not the best result that you can have. So looking at current gaps in that accepted product development cycle, I want to start with pointing out what's always been done, and I say that in air quotes, is both an appealing mindset and a toxic one, right? And why do I say that? Let's look at this graphic here on the right of the slide. This is from Aberdeen Group. They were doing a study on bridging the gap between product development and your operations teams internally. And what they found was that the top challenges that they're facing are reinforcing the pressures that we're talking about on the left here, right? The what's always been done. So A, operating costs are too high. B, too many new product introduction targets are missed, so people aren't getting their new products to market on time. They're managing multiple data sets to try to figure all this out. They're working on reduced budgets, operational or capital, and they're seeing rising costs of raw materials. So what's always been done is certainly appealing, but the way it's always been done creates all these challenges you're seeing on the right? Going past your target date for going to market, running high on your operating costs and budgets, having to manage a diverse bunch of data to get to market in the correct way and successfully. So what many organizations have found, and it sounds like maybe 25% of people here today have found this already, but skipping straight from physical prototyping, that is 3D printing, to pre-production, which is production mold making, has a suboptimal result. Again, in that validation and verification stage, which happens very late in the product development process, organizations often discover unexpected problems. I would even say extremely often. And what does this mean for them? And before we move into what this means, let's address the elephant in the room here. Why is this a toxic mindset? What's always been done? Your industry is an industry built on rapid innovation and change, and one that tends to leave stagnant organizations behind. So while it can be really appealing, especially in this industry around new products for medical device, you're changing all the time. Those devices are changing constantly. And if you're stagnant and you're staying with what's always been done, unfortunately, you're just going to be left behind. Now, let's hop into another quick polling question here, get some more input from our audience today. The question this time around is, have you had a project that you get through all those initial stages, right? But then it's required changes that you didn't find until pre-production or production phase, resulting in added costs and time delays on getting to market. So options here are yes, that happens to our organization fairly frequently. Yes, but it rarely happens to us. It's more of a one-off instance. Or no, this doesn't happen to us at all. We never find problems late in the product development process when we're trying to get to market. And again, I'll give you guys a good amount of time here, good 30, 45 seconds. Select which one would most accurately reflect you and your organization. Awesome, everybody. Keep pouring those answers in. Looks like we're at about 50% of folks having answered already. Keep those coming. We'll keep it open here for another 20, 30 seconds. Okay, we're at about 70% have responded. Just get those last couple in here for me. Give you another 5, 10 seconds here before I roll over to the results. All right, last couple answers here. I'm going to switch it over in 5 seconds. Okay. Thank you, everybody, again, for your input. Really appreciate the participation. It certainly helps kind of paint the picture, the full picture for the audience for sure. So let's take a look here, okay? Again, the question was, have you ever run into problems when you get all the way to pre-production or the production phase in your product development process? And did it result in added costs and time delays? Wow, guys, I mean, it looks like this is a resounding yes, right? We've got yes frequently, over 50% of participants. And at 46% of participants, we have yes, but rarely. And for just 2%, almost 3% here of our participants today, we're looking at no, a very small portion of people out there, and this rings very true across conversations I've had anecdotally for years. Very few people don't have this problem. And I'll also point out that the people who said they're using Agile and it works well was about the same percentage as the percentage here who said no, they've never run into those problems. So I think, again, want to point that out. I think it's more than coincidence. Again, thank you for your input. So what now, right? We've just established via that polling question and again, some research studies and my personal experience that a lot of people have this problem, right? A lot of folks get all the way to production tooling, and they run into a problem that prevents them from going to market on time and on budget. So what do we do, right? What happens when I've just discovered that my product has failed validation and verification? So unfortunately, fixing a problem, the later you get in the product development process, the more costly and the more timely it's going to be, right? So it's not simple, it's not fast, and it's not cheap when you discover problems this late. You can see a graphic here on the slide that I think really helps hammer this home. And I want to make a really important point about this graphic. These numbers you're seeing, right, $1 in a minute, $10, 10 minutes, 10,000 minutes, $10,000, these are not exact numbers, right? It's not that every time you make a change in 3D printing, the rapid prototype stage, it's going to cost you $100 in 100 minutes. That's an order of magnitude, right? We're trying to give you an idea of what order of magnitude you're in when you're looking at changes. And as you can see, the product development process operates like an exponential curve in terms of the further along you go, the more exponentially time-consuming and costly it is to make changes. So early on, when you're just at the idea phase, you're just at the design phase, you've only done 3D printing, it's not a huge deal, right? You can double back really easily and make changes to your design and get a new 3D print for hundreds of dollars and hundreds of minutes. It's not going to take a lot of time or money. Same thing for prototype tooling, right? So looking at the Agile process, we're going to get into this a little deeper in a moment, but it adds in this process in between rapid prototyping and full-on production, right? You need something between 3D printing and steel tooling that's going to both offer important and valuable feedback that 3D printing and rapid prototyping itself cannot, but also that is able to be quickly and easily changed, both in terms of time and money. So that's where this prototype tooling stage comes in. And you can see it's an order of magnitude 10 less in terms of time and money to make a change at that stage, to discover a problem at that stage, than it is if you get all the way up to that production level, right? So what this means is you have a choice, right? You can neglect the prototype tooling phase. You can go the traditional waterfall method and pay tens of thousands of dollars and wait weeks to months for a fix when you find a problem. Because again, as we just saw in that poll, you find problems. Now, the other option is that instead you can discover that problem earlier, right? Stages earlier. And as a result, get to market on time and on budget as a result of not having to shell out tens of thousands of dollars and minutes to fix your problems, right? So, and let's also note, the above information, everything we just talked about, assumes you don't run into further issues after your first modification to production tooling, which is also incredibly common. If you're having an issue at that stage, it usually takes a couple of grooms or a couple of changes to dial you in. So that's not just one time that you're paying $10,000 and 10,000 minutes or in that range, but multiple times, right? So now that I've scared you half to death in terms of going over budget and over the time you've been allotted, we need to address how can you ensure that this doesn't happen, right? And I think 2% of people on the call already have that answer, so I'm very glad. For the rest of us, I'm going to walk through exactly how we can change the way we approach this, both as an organization and as an individual. So starting at the organizational level, right? How can we ensure it doesn't happen? I think the first thing that we need to do is have a reimagined product development cycle, right? We need to move towards verifying and validating our designs and our end products as early as we can in the product development process. And what lends itself really well to that is Agile hardware product development. So you can see the graphic I have on the right here, and this is adapted, right? I've adapted this a bit for our talk today, for the industry, and for the fact that this was originally come up with for software rather than hardware, right? So it's little iterative loops that make sure that you have validation and verification each step of the way before moving into the next phase, right? So no wasted effort here. What you're looking at is you start with an idea. You create a design and simulate with that, right? You do some 3D printing. You assemble those 3D prints. You test them to the best of your ability. And once you verify that that's working the way you would expect it to and you're getting good results, you move to the next feedback loop, right? And we call that modify. So now it's time to do some design for injection molding prototype tooling, right? You're going to get some injection molds prototyped out. You're going to assemble and test those prototypes, right? Taking it a step further than 3D printing. Because there's a whole new group of things you can test, right? You can test actual thermoplastics. You can test surface finishes. You can test the actual, tolerances and the dimensions that you've accounted for in your design and make sure they all fit and function together correctly. So at that modify stage, again, adding in that prototype tooling stage allows you to find those problems before you move up to finalize and go on to production, right? So now if you run into a problem with your prototype tool, no big deal. A couple $1,000, couple of thousand minutes or hours there, and you're going to have, some new products and tweaks to your tooling. And again, you're going to be able to run back through this loop, test them, assemble them, make sure they work. Now you can make that change and figure out that problem for 10x less than the traditional product development cycle. And you're also able to bring down the time in which you're finding them, right? So once you get through that loop, and now you've got your prototype tooling that works, the parts are coming out exactly as you like them, it's very easy now to move into that final verification and validation for your production, because now your prototype tooler, whether that's your in-house capabilities or a partner that you leverage, those people are able to pass on their learnings to your production tooler. So now you can plan very extensively for how your production tooling is going to be designed based on past successful results. Then you're able to actually design that tool, create that tool, analyze that tool, and run your parts, right? Moving seamlessly into production instead of finding that error at this phase that you haven't been testing for all along. So what does all this mean, right? What does all this mean to you? It means that instead of, again, spending tens of thousands of dollars in weeks to months fixing and finding errors, you can just prevent them, right? And prototype tooling can be as low as $1,500 for a tool, and it can be completed as quickly as 5 business days from your order. That's out there in the industry, right? The ability to quickly iterate in molding is out there. At the end of the day, I think it's really driven home, again, by the Aberdeen Group's research study that I had cited earlier, again, talking about bridging that gap between product development and operations. And what they figured out, kind of their conclusion, so to speak, was that the focus early on design for manufacturability reduces the risk in new product introduction processes. And furthermore, they found that the best in class led the way when it came to utilizing DFM, that is design for manufacturability, each way throughout that process, right? It built knowledge for them around the issues that could arise during their manufacturing, which allowed them to detect them earlier, and as a result, avoid doubling back and doing extra work, right? So this goes a long way for these folks in having best-in-class numbers at 92% successful new product introduction rate and a 93% overall equipment effectiveness rate, right? So these are really big metrics in our industry. They're getting to market on time, 92% of the time, and they're actually utilizing their capabilities as effectively as possible at 93%. Those are huge, right? So let's move into some takeaways here. So let me ask you this question, and this is going to set the scene for our transition here and our next topic in the webinar today. Do you personally in your organization include both 3D printing and injection molding prototype tooling in your product development process? Right? And your options for an answer here are you only do 3D printing, you mainly do 3D printing, you typically split about evenly between prototyping in each of the processes, you mainly prototype via injection molding prototyping, or you only prototype via injection molding prototyping. So again, I'm going to give everyone a good 30, 45 seconds here, get some answers in, and give us some feedback on what your typical product development process looks like. One, the other, a little bit of both. Okay, we're up at about 60% of folks having answered. I'm going to give it another 20, 30 seconds here for everybody else to just get their answers in here. All right, we're hovering right at about 65% of people responding. Let's get those last couple of answers in here, and I'm going to close out the poll here in the next 15 or so seconds. Okay, I'm going to give everyone about 5 more seconds here, and then I'm going to close out the poll. The last couple answers in. Okay, let's take a look at the results here. All right, we've got a pretty even split on this question, right? We've got 20% of people who just do 3D printing, another third of people who mainly do 3D printing, a third of folks who split evenly between injection molding prototyping and 3D printing prototyping, and then about 10% of folks who lean more heavily towards injection molding or only do injection molding for their prototyping. So gives you an idea. We've got all trains of thought and all manners of practice here on the call, which is great. Gives us a lot of different perspectives. And let me show you why I asked, right? I consider these two processes incredibly complementary. I consider them, in fact, a 1-2 punch. These two together allow you to, again, validate and verify weeks and weeks sooner than that production level. And I want to walk you through what you can glean from each one, right? Where each one's going to add value for you. So with 3D printing, you're going to be able to prove out a couple of things within a few days and a couple $100, right? The first is going to be the part appearance and shape. Like we talked about earlier, you've had a CAD model that lives in a 2D space up until that point. So you do finally get a look at the part appearance and shape, which is really, really good. The second thing you're going to get is the feasibility of your current design, right? Is this even feasible? Does this make sense? Does it function the way that we thought it might? And then last but not least, you're going to get some beginning material information, right? You're going to be able to start gleaning some of those rough behaviors and properties of the plastics that you're zeroing in on for in production. And it's going to give you some insights into what might work best for your given design intent. Once you've done 3D printing, I think, again, it is largely important, very, very important to include this second step, because with prototype tooling, you can further prove many more things that you would also be able to prove with your production tooling, but for only a few $1,000s in a few weeks instead of tens of thousands and tens of thousands of hours, right? So in this case, with prototype tooling, you can verify the dimensional properties, right? This is in a final finished thermoplastic, the same thermoplastic you're going to use in production. So you can verify those dimensional properties, that everything's coming out shrink rate wise as you expect it to. That feeds into the second point. You're going to learn some more about those material behaviors that you couldn't at the 3D printed level, because true thermoplastics are going to act very different than 3D printed filaments, right? You're going to also be able to glean information on parts of the designs that you've submitted that have shrinkage, warp, sink, splay, and other aesthetic issues, right? Very easy to quickly fix with a prototype tool. Get all of those worked out before moving on to the production design. And it's also going to give you the ability to work out, again, any changes for final fit and function with the remaining assembly. So this is to say you can get each of those individual parts together, make sure that they mate correctly, make sure that they're all going to play the way that you expect them to, again, before moving to production. And again, to point out, you can't do that at the 3D printing phase. It's not something where you're going to have the true thermoplastic. It's not something that's going to show you problems with undercuts or other geometries. So very important to have this prototype tooling phase, and certainly why I call them the 1-2 punch. So let's shift gears a bit and go back into what does this mean for me, right? What's the differences between these product development cycles? What are those differences going to give me in terms of value? And how do I do that as an individual, right? How do I incorporate that strategy? So I want to shift gears to that. And let's start by just a quick comparison, right? You've got your traditional product development cycle, the waterfall method that we mentioned earlier in the call. You can see the graphic again here, top right. And then below it, you can see the Agile product prove-out approach, which is what we've been talking about and kind of focusing on here in the recent slides. Just notice the difference, right? Aesthetically speaking, you've got all your teams operating in these closed feedback loops so that you're keeping everyone on the same page, figuring out those problems early in the process, whereas above, you've got 4 or 5 different departments that all have action items at each different stage, and they're all doing all that work, again, before you ever get to the end where you verify and validate that any of the stuff you just had all your people do worked out and is actually going to work in a practical sense. So keeping that in mind, let's hop into a really fun vacation-y feeling question. All right. So if you could remove 4 to 6 weeks from your product development cycle, that is, you could get to market that much quicker or eliminate the need to do that extra validation and verification in those 4 to 6 weeks, what would you do with that extra time? And you can choose as many as you'd like here. So would you use that extra 4 to 6 weeks to add more product features that your clients would like? Do you use it to add more physical test loops and just double and triple verify that everything's going to work as you would like it to? Would you add more market feedback loops where you're actually getting some feedback from the market on these products along the way? Or would you maybe even launch sooner than planned, right? Get to market ahead of your launch date and potentially ahead of your competition? So if you guys would just, and gals would just select any of these options that you could see yourself doing with that extra 4 to 6 weeks if you could remove that from your traditional product development cycle. Awesome. We got about 50% of folks here that have answered already. We'll let those keep flowing in here for another 20, 30 seconds and just get your answers submitted here in the next 20, 30 seconds. Okay, we're just about 70% of attendees have answered. Just get those last couple in here. I'll give you another 15 seconds before I share the results. Okay, give you another 5 seconds here, get these last couple in. Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and click over here. Great. So we've got a ton of response here, and obviously this isn't going to add up to 100 this time around because we allowed multiple clicks. So this is really helpful, right? Helps us understand what people would do with that extra time if they were able to carve out that 4 to 6 weeks from the traditional product development cycle in terms of getting to market. So we have about 20% of people would add some more product features. A good 35% of people would add some more physical test loops. Another 43% would add market feedback loops. And a whopping 83% of us, so almost all of us here, would want to launch sooner than planned. Just beat the competition to market, beat our own goals, make our bosses and management really happy, and help the company succeed, right? Makes total sense. I'm not surprised by any of those answers, and they're all great answers because you're exactly right. So let's talk about it, right? What does verification 6 weeks sooner, instead of finding out when you're almost at market and having to make changes, if you instead can verify 6 weeks sooner, what is that going to get you, right? First and foremost, it's going to give you the ability to make changes and fix errors in your designs at a low cost with a quick turnaround, which is going to give you one of the options from the last slide, right? The ability to iterate several more times and make sure that you really get it right while still hitting your deadlines and your budget for your optimal product launch. The second thing it's going to get you is the ability to plan for or adjust your go-to-market strategy when there's still time and budget to do so, right? Before investing in that production tooling, you're still going to be able to kind of shift around, change your launch dates, and accommodate so that your end customers and your management are not all of a sudden surprised at the 11th hour that you're not going to make it to market, right? Another thing it's going to give you is additional learned information to pass on to that eventual production tooler, right? We can tell them exactly how it was designed, the tooling that is, what worked well, given your materials and the geometries, what didn't work well. All of that can be used to make the production toolers and the design and execution of that so much easier. And ultimately, what does this all mean? Why should you care at all? Peace of mind. Guys and gals, right? You're saving lives. You're in an industry where your job is hard enough without any manufacturing surprises. People's quality of life directly depends on what you create and how quickly you're able to create it and get it to the people who need it, right? So at the end of the day, if nothing else, verification 6 weeks sooner gives you peace of mind that the people who need your product are going to get it when they expect it, right? I think that's incredibly important. So now you're asking, okay, how do I incorporate this strategy, right? You sold me. It sounds great. I would love to verify results 6 weeks sooner, get to market sooner, add additional loops for feedback. All those things sounded good to the audience. So the next logical step would be, okay, great. So what about me? How do I do this? And I think it's really important to talk about it, right? Waterfall is something that is in place because, again, as we spoke about in an earlier slide, it's what's always been done. And when you have something that's always been done and is widely accepted in a field, I understand that it is incredibly difficult to move away and get buy-in on a new strategy, right? I get that. So my advice for you as individuals, right, beyond the company, is to try incorporating this new strategy in terms of the Agile product development process. Try it first with projects that don't involve many parts, right? Projects that will be inexpensive. They're not really big, really important projects, right? Projects that are not time sensitive, that if you miss your go-to-market date, it's not going to be the end of the world, right? And projects that you feel are going to need a certain number of changes or multiple iterations right from the beginning. I work with customers all the time who come to me and say, hey, we know that there are going to be changes to this product, and often that is in the medical field because every 6 months or so that design is going to change, right? So it's really important to try the strategy with those projects that are going to change anyways, so you're probably already budgeting for those changes just way down the line at an inflated rate. But I say all this to say, start trying this with low-risk projects to minimize your personal risk, right? I don't want you to go out and stick your neck out on a huge, crazy, time-critical, super important project for your first foray into Agile product development, right? I don't think that's wise. The caveat to that is this strategy is going to be most beneficial on those high-complexity, multi-part assemblies. But again, I realize it's not reasonable to start at that level and try to sell that through to management and the rest of your team, right? So my advice is, again, start small, start on those low-risk projects, prove out that even in small instances with pretty predictable products, it saves you a couple weeks and a couple $1,000s, and then it's easy to get that buy-in and extrapolate that out to those high-complexity, multi-part assemblies that are really going to give you the savings, right? Those are the ones where, across 9 tools, you can potentially run into 9 errors at the tune of tens of thousands for each of those tools to be changed. So the first time you do that in a different way, and now you're paying $1,000 across 9 tools to make those changes, it's going to be a huge impact to your business. And that's where you're going to see, again, the most effect of this strategy. But I understand that's not somewhere that you can start. So what's missing, right? We've talked about the traditional product development process. We've talked about the Agile product development process in terms of how it's going to be beneficial, especially in your market. And I would say, how hard is it going to be to implement, right? And that's why I ask what's missing, because you internally have already told me that you guys 3D print. And obviously you use production molds when it's time to get, hundreds of thousands, millions of these parts to market. So that means you're only missing one thing, right? You're missing one thing from our new model, and that is either the internal or the outsourced capability to rapidly iterate on prototype tooling. And again, it doesn't matter if that's internal, if you have a tooling division internally that can produce prototype tooling in a rapid fashion for you, or you find an outsourced partner that's capable of doing that. Either way, it's just important that you get that into your model. And what that enables you to do, again, is quick iterations on those 3D printed designs to quickly identify general concerns and design flaws, prototype tooling creation in less than 2 weeks with samples for you to further test, rapid and low-cost changes to that prototype tooling to ensure that that tool design is refined and ready to go to production, so you don't run into any hidden surprises there. And then last but not least, it enables the transfer of learnings to your in-production vendor. Rather, again, you're making those prototype tools internally or with an outsourced vendor. They are able to pass that knowledge along to the production vendor, ensuring that there are no surprises and you have an easy transition getting to market, right? So I say that you need a partner, either internally or externally, that can handle rapid iteration. What else, though, is important in a manufacturing partner? And I think these 5 things are so incredibly crucial. That's why I've included them, even though they may seem a little off-key here. But I think it's really important not to just say that you have the capability through an internal or outsourced partner to do the work. But I want to tell you what those partners, again, wherever they are, should look like and how they should treat you. So first and foremost, your partners who enable the Agile product development method should make you feel valued and cared for personally and professionally all the time, period, right? You're not trying, to no avail to get a hold of them. They're not telling you you're no Johnson & Johnson, right? It's none of that. They treat you personally and your business professionally with respect and care all the time, period, okay? And the reason for that is if your partners aren't focused on providing you with the best customer experience possible, chances are they're also not going to be super helpful when it comes to minimizing your risk and delivering time-critical parts, right? If they don't even care what your experience is like and that it's easy to work with them, they certainly don't care or have foresight enough to warn you and minimize your risk on time-critical projects. Leads us to our next point. I know it's tempting sometimes, right? We work on a 3-quote system a lot of times, and what you're incentivized to do as an individual is save the company money, right? Go with the lowest price. And I understand that, but again, you're in an industry that saves lives, and I encourage you, don't ever sacrifice quality for price, ever. Don't ever sacrifice someone who's willing to work with you and charges you a little bit extra over someone who's just going to hope things turn out well, but give you a better price. Build a network of trusted partners, not just vendors, not just quoters, partners that demonstrate a sense of urgency and the capacity to set and deliver on realistic expectations, right? They're a person who's going to shoot you straight. They're going to tell you up front what to expect. And then when you get their product, they deliver on that expectation, right? And last but not least, a really, really good partner, a really, really good manufacturing partner should be so plugged into your organization that instead of being reactive and simply responding when you ask them for things, they actually anticipate your needs and reach out proactively about what they can be helping with, right? These things are what's going to make a really good manufacturing partner when it comes to rapid iterations and time-critical projects and reducing your time to market. Now, shifting gears, I know there are some folks out there who would be naysayers, generally speaking, to the Agile development process for hardware, right? Again, like I said, it was originally applied to software, and some folks argue that just doesn't have any place in hardware. So let's walk through some of the myths. Let's debunk them, and then let's talk about some of the true challenges. Again, I'm a transparent guy, as any partner should be, and you want to make sure that you know what challenges you're going to face in incorporating this. So first, the myths, right? Again, Agile applies only to software. I think that is definitely debunked. We'll see some real-life examples of companies here in a couple slides who have implemented Agile with their hardware to great success. And I saw that even some folks on this call today have implemented Agile and that it's working well for them. And they're not software companies, right? We're all medical companies. So that's really good data. Second myth, Agile won't work for medical device because of FDA regulations. Also a common myth. There is nothing in FDA regulation that specifies the specific product development process that you must use, right? So that is one that I can debunk for you as well. So can, again, the other clients at the end of this presentation and some of the folks on the call today, because they've already implemented it successfully. Last but not least, the physical prototype requirements for hardware limit the usefulness of Agile. And again, I would certainly disagree here. The physical prototype requirements actually are very useful for this industry because they allow you to prove out and save yourself time and money before getting all the way to production, which is not quite the same with software. Again, software is a bit lower risk. They can, change things, make fixes, push bug error, resolutions anytime. So definitely would say that one is debunked. Now, shifting gears into some challenges. Again, I'm not naive. There are challenges to adopting this internally, and those are, it is very culturally difficult to break from the traditional waterfall model. I've already addressed that, and to say it again, start with projects that are very low risk. Don't put yourself personally out there on the line, right? Be very careful and very smart about how you bring this into your organization. But we do realize, and the people who have adopted it will also speak to that, it is culturally difficult to break from what's always been done. Another challenge is that team members tend to be more specialized, okay? So you don't have such general roles going on. There are specialized teams that are operating in these closed loop fashions, so that is a change and a challenge. There are fewer modular tasks that can be completed in 2-week sprints here than in software. Obviously, that is a little bit more limited, but as we mentioned, you can get prototype tooling in as fast as 1 week, about 5 business days. So I would say that even though there are fewer modular tasks that can be completed in 2-week sprints, there are still many of these modules along the way, 3D printing, prototype tooling, that do have really quick sprints. And then lastly, you must have the manufacturing ability to produce prototypes quickly. That's certainly a challenge. As I addressed earlier, not everyone has an internal source or capability for that. So again, it's very important, and it is a challenge to find a trusted manufacturing partner that gives you that ability to produce prototypes quickly and across multiple processes. Now, I promised some examples. So again, from the same study I've been referencing throughout the presentation here today, We do have some data on some specific companies that have implemented this. Now, forgive us, it wasn't the most detailed data by any means. These companies are pretty guarded, as you can imagine, about what they were willing to share in terms of the actual numbers behind the impact. But I will point out, Siemens, Roche, GE Healthcare, Battelle, Baxter have all adopted the Agile methodology to their hardware, not just software, right? So at GE, they were able to reduce product development time, which typically took them 12 to 14 months. So they were able to bring that down across the board. They were also able to identify clinical workflows not known at the beginning of a product's development, right? So this is what we were talking about before, the ability to suss out and to find those different problems early in the process at the beginning of the product's development. And at Siemens, they found that the overage hours, we talked about earlier on a previous slide, overage being a big problem. Siemens was able to reduce pretty drastically those overage hours, and their average working times were consistent with fewer spikes, right? So they didn't have people coming in on night shifts to backfill overdue orders. They didn't have that kind of stuff going on. They were able to more consistently manage their working time for their employees with fewer spikes. So I think those are some really important successes. And again, a larger list up here that have implemented than we have results on here. But just interesting. If you have any friends, any family at one of those companies, maybe worth reaching out and just learning, kind of from them and what they've taken away so far. But our key takeaways today, to kind of summarize here, and again, thank you everyone for spending the time, but key takeaways for us today: the existing product development cycle, bare bones, leaves you and your business exposed to unnecessary risk. It doesn't need to be there. You could figure it out sooner, but we just accept what always been done, right? Second, skipping straight from 3D printing to full-on production almost always leads to added cost, added time, and missed go-to-market deadlines, which is a big problem and pain point for each and every one of us. Utilizing the Agile approach can detect and eliminate those issues and errors early in the process, saving you time and money via both the combination of 3D printing prototyping and prototype tooling. The new approach is not actually that large a deviation from what you already do, right? We just talked about it. You only add in one step from what you've been doing so far and just approach each step slightly differently and a bit more intelligently. But again, it should be utilized first on smaller or less sensitive projects to minimize your personal risk in the organization. Always choose partners, whether that's internal partners or external partners that you outsource to, that are responsive, that are proactive, that are easy to work with, and are invested in your success in tangible ways, right? They show you that all the time. And another key takeaway, and really my final point here, others in this industry are already having success with this approach, right? So why aren't we? For those on the call who haven't even tried this or maybe have tried it on a couple of projects, key takeaway here, it is successful. It has been proven that it works within this industry. And I would love to see more people, able to save those 4 to 6 weeks, get to market earlier, add iterations, add market research. All of those things would be beneficial for all of us across the board. And just a couple of, one final topic here in terms of who are we and why am I telling you all this and why is this relative to me and my company? We've been providing injection molding and other manufacturing services for over 24 years to more than 50 industries. Again, one of our major industries being medical device. Our 2 manufacturing facilities are in Southeast Michigan, right around Clinton Township. All of our molds are designed, built, and run on-site in those 2 facilities. So we've produced physically over 100,000 prototype injection molds across that time. We do offer thousands of different engineering-grade materials. Anything you can source or provide or we can get a hold of, we're happy to mold with. And we are ISO 9001 as well as ITAR and UL registered and certified. So just a little bit about us and kind of our expertise and the fact that we've been seeing this proved out and been playing in this space for 23, 24 years at this point. At this point, I'm going to pass it back over to Peter. I want to say thank you to everyone for being my audience today, and I think we're going to segue into some questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you, Taylor. Yes, hi, everyone. This is your moderator, Peter. We're going to go to Q&A. Before we do, however, I just want to remind you about the webinar survey. I mentioned that earlier. It's available on the right of the presentation window. If you close the survey, you can reopen the widget. To do that, just click the icon that's along the bottom of your screen. Thanks in advance for filling out the feedback form. As I mentioned, your participation in the survey, it helps us to serve you better in the future. Let's move on to question and answer. It is not too late to submit a question. We still have plenty of time. You just type your question into the text box that's located to the right of the presentation window. Or you can click on the Q&A icon that's at the bottom of your screen. All right, let's go into this. Here's our first question. If a complete design cannot be 100% proto-tooled, do companies do partial verification in earlier phases to minimize what is needed to be done in later phases?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kevin. I appreciate you submitting and stepping up to the plate here. So it's, again, a really good question. If your design is not 100% injection molding components, which I think is what your question was, companies do actually engage in partial verification in earlier phases. And the reason is, for example, if your overall assembly were made up of, let's say, all three of the processes we've kind of discussed today, maybe you have some 3D printed components, maybe you have some CNC machined components, and then some injection molding components, that in the end, those will all be processes involved. I don't think that happens very often, but let's just take it as an extreme example. At that beginning phase, obviously you're doing 3D printing on almost all the parts, not the CNC one that's metal, but the other ones. You're doing, that early 3D printing verification. And then if those parts are going to move to tooling in the end, yes, as early as possible, once you've got that 3D printing side of things nailed down, go ahead and start verifying with that prototype tooling. Because as you found, CNC lead times are, 5-7 days, 3D printing lead times, 3 to 5 days, something like that, typically speaking across the industry. So you're going to be able to verify those components really early in the process via a couple of iterations in 3D printing or CNC. So it definitely would be beneficial, and I have seen my clients specifically verifying injection molded portions of an overall assembly earlier in the process, yes.
Great, Taylor. All right, here's our next question. How many parts will the prototype tooling typically make? How many parts?
Yeah, Glenn, that is a really, really good question. I appreciate, again, you submitting it and stepping up here for the audience. So it really depends, right? This is a bit of a subjective question, and I say that because prototype tooling is usually just defined as aluminum tooling. There are different grades of aluminum, just like there are different grades of steel that you could create that tooling from. And as you get harder and harder in terms of the grade of aluminum or steel, you're going to get more longevity out of the tooling. So I would say, for your run-of-the-mill part, let's say you're using a common thermoplastic, something like ABS or nylon. It's not super abrasive. It's not wearing off your corners really quickly. Something like an ABS in an aluminum tool is usually going to last 10, 25,000 parts before you need to replace that tooling. And then on the production end, when you get up into steel tooling, those are going to be more like in the hundreds of thousands of parts in terms of tool lives. One note is there are prototype toolers out there who do offer a lifetime guarantee on their tooling, on the aluminum tooling, with the intent to be a longer-term resource, right? Be able to hold people over in between prototyping and production in an area we call bridge tooling, which is where, you still need products, but your production tooling takes months to create. So it's nice to have that aluminum tool or that prototype tool continue to make parts for you in that interim, which is why, again, a lot of prototype toolers, or some of them out there, we're one of them, would offer a lifetime guarantee on the mold, so you can get beyond that 10 to 25,000 parts you could expect. Very good question.
Great. Okay. All right, here's our next question. What is your opinion on the following? Utilizing a stereolithographic 3D printer benchtop injection molder for in-house short-run prototyping. What's your opinion on that? And do you think it adds value?
Yeah, Sean, appreciate the submission there. So I'm going to make sure I'm understanding or kind of talk through it, but we're talking about utilizing SLA, a 3D printing technology, accompanied by benchtop injection molding for in-house short-run prototyping. My general thought is, again, whether it's an internal or an external capability, having that ability to create 3D prints, whether it's SLA, SLS, FDM, there are a lot of different 3D printing methods out there. Different ones are going to fit well depending on what your end use is and what you're trying to prove at that stage. But I think in general, utilizing a 3D printer in-house is definitely going to add value and save you time in terms of iterations, or again, leveraging an outsourced vendor who can quickly give you 3D printed iterations. And the same is true of injection molding. I would say, I'm not super familiar with benchtop injection molder specifically for in-house. I would say once you're at the injection molding level, you want to be simulating as close to possible as what you'll be doing on the production level, which would be a real injection molder, typically speaking, overseas or in the U.S. creating steel tooling. So to that end, I would probably say I would steer away from a benchtop injection molder in-house unless you have a lot of expertise on the team with injection molding. I would say probably easier and more cost-effective to bring 3D printing in-house and have a good outsourced partner for injection molding if you don't have either currently.
Okay, great. Here's our next question, sort of a tactical one. I think Agile hardware development process would really benefit my company, but I'm just one engineer, so how do I get something like this started in my organization?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I appreciate that question. That's a great question, and I think we covered it a little bit in today's presentation, but just to reiterate, to get this started, you're exactly right. You are just one engineer, and I know some companies are overwhelmingly large, right? So it looks different for everyone in terms of selling that through internally, depending on the size and the structure of your organization. But again, I would say the best place to start is just socializing it with your team, socializing it with your direct manager, and maybe giving it a trial run on a really simple, really easy, low-risk project, some low-hanging fruit, if you will, just so that everyone feels comfortable giving it that initial shot. Once you see the results from that initial time, it's going to be much easier to get buy-in to use it a bit more often. So I think it's a building block process, right, where you kind of educate the team, share this information with them, and then slowly try to identify projects that would be a good first, second step to get that going.
Okay. For our next question, I've only experienced injection molding prototyping taking 8 to 12 weeks. How can it be done in as little as 1 week, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've seen that a lot. That is definitely a pretty common misconception. Maybe I should have had it in our myths slide. But injection molding prototype tooling, that is aluminum tooling. There are definitely several outsourced providers out there. We're one of them here at Excentric who are able to create that tooling in very fast lead times. Again, quickest I've seen is with us at about 5 business days. There are other people who are pretty similar there as well. But, how do we achieve that? We use a proprietary insert system for our molds that allows us to create that tooling much quicker than your standard. Not sure that I can speak to how other folks achieve it, but it is out there, and you can find people who are able to rapidly iterate on tooling. You don't have to wait 8 to 12 weeks, that's for sure.
Okay, looks like we have time to squeeze in one last question. Have you had tooling that was needed for various material? For example, a hard plastic gripper finger with a urethane tip in a 2-step process?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question as well, Ed. I love that. That's what is known as typically overmolding. And we do offer overmolding. I've seen tooling for various medical companies as well as consumer goods. Like, for example, if you see a common spatula that has 2 different plastics, one for the handle, one for the actual spatula, or even, metal spatula and then plastic handle. But either way, yes. There is a way, and there are multiple molders out there that offer it to be able to mold multiple materials that are different onto or into one another. Yes, very good question.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. We're at the top of the hour, so unfortunately we're out of time. But I want to thank Taylor. I want to thank you for your time and your expertise on today's topic. I want to thank our sponsor, Excentric Mold and Engineering, as well as everyone in the audience. We certainly appreciate your attention and participation. I'd also like to encourage everyone to join us for the next webinar in this series that's coming on March 25. It's entitled Saving Lives, the Value of Speed to Market in Medical Device Development. You can register for this now. You just select the green register button That's right within your console window. Also, within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email. This will contain details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please invite your colleagues and peers who couldn't join us today. They can listen to the event on demand. This webinar is copyright 2021 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Informa Markets, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. Again, thanks for your time, and have a great rest of your day.